Welcome back to the Changemaker podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is my good friend, Gabe McGuire. Gabe is an 18-year-old political leader from the rural town of Mercersburg, Pennsylvania, a current freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. He serves as the president of the Young Forwardists Committee, the Forward Party's youth wing. Under Gabe's inaugural leadership, the Young Forwardists developed 33 high school and college chapters in their first 2 months. And the list goes on. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome my friend Gabe McGuire.
Welcome to the Changemaker podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Thank you, Deke. It's a pleasure to be back, and I'm excited to chat.
Well, so when last we talked, it was last summer. So you had not started Penn yet, or maybe you had. You had not. So what are your first impressions? I mean, what's it like to be a freshman at Penn, and particularly with having watched, the fall elections play out from a college campus?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think that it's always tough to adjust to a new setting. It took me a little bit to adjust to Penn's culture and the academics here, and it has been tough, right? Who would have thought that college is hard? But it's been particularly exciting around the election, right? Pennsylvania was one of the most crucial swing states in the election. And so it seemed like every other week that Harris or Trump were in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. And so really our campus was a hot spot for political activism this past November and in the lead up to the election. And so it's really, really rewarding to see so many youth engaged in politics, in discussions, and committed to educating themselves about American politics.
Well, Gabe, for our viewers and listeners that didn't listen to you last time, tell them a little bit about how the Young Forwardists got started, because I think that is such a cool story.
Yeah, well, I've been involved with the Forward Party for 3 years. And as a native to Pennsylvania, I naturally became involved with the Pennsylvania Forward Party. But it just seemed like for such a youthful message, right, for the Forward Party's youthful appeal, there were so few other young people in the calls. I think on average, there was like a 40-year age gap. And so me and a couple others from the state of PA set out on an adventure to set up some more systems and more ways to attract youth to the party, because we really, really believe that the Forward Party is a future for the country, but really something that can be active and engaging to a more youthful audience.
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to a Young Presidents Organization event last Tuesday, right? And so it was a group of couples, but my topic was, how do you develop change-making leaders at any age? But so it was just an amazing talk about how do you shape young leadership. But I got the question, so if our kids want to participate in the public square, where is it for them to do that now? Where can they go? So I was happy to tell them about the Young Forwardists. And I'm like, look, these were guys, this was 6 teenagers, in their bedrooms. And I'm like, at that age, I was concerned where my next beer and my next date were coming from. But that's really impressive that you guys are really, you don't just want to change, but you are changing the way America looks at politics.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for the shout out at that place too. I think the real key theme here is agency. I was so lucky to be given the opportunity and the space to pursue political change making, not only through the Forward Party, but also through the Pennsylvania Forward Party, right? They gave their trust in us. They gave us the position and the resources to actually go out and make a change the way that we see fit. And so I think such a key component to youth activism and youth change making is having and feeling and then taking advantage of the sense of agency that you have over politics. I mean, there seems to be the illusion that you can't get involved in politics or you can't really make your voice heard, especially as somebody younger. But we're here to contradict that.
Well, and that's what I've always said is that, leadership knows no age. There's no age requirement. So what you guys are doing is leading. I had Lindsay Drath, our CEO, on as a podcast guest here recently. But it's if everybody adopts the attitude that nothing is ever going to change, nothing ever will change. But for me, the status quo is not good enough. And as leaders, no matter what the age, we should always be challenging the status quo and trying to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of people accept the status quo, especially recently. And I think the lack of desire to change that, or the lack of desire to get involved and really push for a fight, or really push back against some of the oppressive forces, is some of the reasons why people are so dissatisfied with politics right now. And our goal, too, as an organization in the field, especially dealing with youth, is to make sure that people know that they have a space and an opportunity to get involved. Because oftentimes, as soon as you're aware of that, you feel more able to go out and make your voice heard.
So describe for me what the feeling is politically on Penn's campus. I mean, are there, because a lot of the times it's portrayed that these campuses are, totally left wing, totally right wing. But I think there's a diversity of spirit and thought on college campuses that might not be making it out there within the mainstream media.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of assumptions about Penn were that it would be extremely liberal, especially in the lead up to the election. But I mean, if you look at the alumni right now, like Musk and Trump are kind of the two most prolific Penn alumni at the moment. So I think that in my school in particular, it tended to be that people felt more comfortable voicing more liberal perspectives on a college campus in a much more public setting, whereas the tendency tended to be that many Republicans or conservatives or even independents felt like they couldn't really share their voice because they didn't feel like they were welcome there. I think that after the election, we saw a lot more of that, where people were less afraid to speak their perspectives, even if it was kind of at odds with what the popular sentiment seemed to be. And I think that's true across a lot of campuses, right? College is often assumed to be a very liberal space, but that's not to say that there aren't diverging perspectives. And that's not to say that that doesn't change by community or by program or by major even. So I think it's really unique, but I don't think our campus is too unique compared to the general trends across the country.
It's funny to me, though. Politicians will often say, we need more civility in politics, which I totally agree with. But then, you have something happen, an assassination attempt, something like that. For a split second, you get that civility, but then it's gone. So for me, it's like, we can't be it if we can't see it. So we need people taking part in the political process that are treating each other in a civil manner and that can have those dialogues. I'm like, I love learning different people's points of view. And if they're better on a position than I am, or I agree with them more, I'm happy to adopt their position.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the most important thing, and you said this yourself too, is it's more about the action rather than just saying it, right?
Yeah.
How hollow can your words be if all you say is, let's make change or let's be better to each other, if you're not the one pushing that narrative through your word or through your actions and through how you conduct yourself in office. That's something that the Young Forwardists have actually focused a lot on, both in local politics and federal politics through an initiative called the Watchdogs of Democracy, where we're actively monitoring when politicians do that, how they do that, and how their constituency is impacted then by the lack of kind of true representation and true good behavior rather than empty promises and kind of blank checks.
Well, and that for me is, and I often say that my podcast is sort of counter programming to the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. So bringing on those voices that we can have a conversation. We don't have to agree on everything, but it's the divisive politics and the toxic politics just really, I mean, they're infecting churches, they're infecting neighborhoods, they're mm-hmm. infecting cities. And I say it's like a disease, and we need a cure for the disease. And you guys are part of the cure and part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, thank you. I mean, I like being part of the solution and not part of the problem. But I really think, again, it is about putting yourself in the right mindset. Yeah. You need to make sure that you're comfortable having your opinions challenged and going into conversations willing to have your perspective challenged. What really is kind of critical and abusive to our democracy, not only at the moment, but in American history, is when we become self-affirmed in our perspectives and aren't willing to challenge the values that we hold. I think the best lessons that I've learned are when I hear other people's takes on my own opinions, even if it's something that I cherish very central to my identity and to my kind of perspective as an individual in the American democracy. But by being willing to have and acknowledge challenges to my own perspective, I feel like I and a lot of others that I've interacted with have actually become far more civically minded.
Well, it's interesting, and I speaking to the group last week, I said once again, if you can't see it, you can't be it. But in my family, my mother was a liberal Democrat, my dad was a conservative Republican. They never voted the same in a presidential election in over 40 years of marriage, But my family, we don't have political arguments, although we have different views. But because our parents modeled that for us and put love of family above their own political views. But from the time I was old enough to talk, we were having political conversations at the dinner table and nobody got up mad. I mean, and so having a Democrat for my mother, a Republican for my father, it gave me a diverse point of view that I know helped me look at all sides when I was in office. It's just no one side can always be right, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think a shocking fact now is that dating apps will have your political preference on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, some of them definitely do. But it tends to be a theme where people are like, oh, you hold this political perspective. I don't even want to engage with you. I don't even want to have a relationship with you. I mean, it's crazy that politics have seeped that deep of a level. And I mean, in your own perspective, years ago, we were able to have those relationships across the partisan divide. But now it truly is seeped to every single level. And so it takes a commitment from us and from individuals who are willing to have challenging discussions or to challenge their own perspectives to then re-engage with that part of societal connection that we've truly, truly damaged.
Well, and I think, what I like about podcasts too is that they are conversational and people can actually learn from them. But I think social media, obviously, some people think, well, we're all connected and everything. We have an epidemic of loneliness, and getting on social media and just going off on somebody or just sharing one-sided views, I'm like, we're never going to get anywhere. Let's sit down and have a face-to-face conversation. And you might realize somebody's not quite as different from you as you may think they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of people nowadays are scared too to have those face-to-face communications. I'm curious if you've seen that in your work too, if you've done podcasts in person. Does that really shine through or engaging with your community? Is that something that you found?
It's interesting. So I'm a movement partner for Builders. Used to be Starts With Us, now it's Builders. But 2 years ago, we did a Man on the Street, Starts With Us on the Street interviews. So I interviewed people at our farmers market for 5.5 hours. Are we divided as a nation? And if so, why? But so there were probably 1,000 people there throughout that day. So people said, we're not really divided. Look around. And people said, it's really the politicians and the media that divide us. But we did the same thing in San Francisco and San Antonio, pretty much the same answers in every city. We don't want to be divided. We want to see people come together. We don't want to be afraid of our neighbor. So if you get out there at the true grassroots level, it does not even feel so divided.
That's really interesting. Because that always makes me think, right? Like, how are we this divided now as a society and culturally, if we all kind of collectively at the local grassroots level think that we truly aren't different as people, right? What are the fundamental impediments or roadblocks in our society, whether that's the news, whether that's politicians that are kind of making us that way? And if we do acknowledge that we can be unified or we don't have to be as polarized, what mental part of this is kind of keeping us from reaching that point?
It's interesting. I talked about this with Lindsay, but the 24-hour news cycle and social media, it's just a constant information feed. And I got off of social media about 2 months ago. I stopped looking at all media. And so some of the research I did basically said, you don't give up bad habits. You just have to replace them with good habits.
That's a good point.
So the time I spent on the screen, doom scrolling or on social media, I'm like, now I listen to podcasts, I read voraciously, and my world has not changed because I'm not glued to a TV set or a computer screen. But I think that's what, once again, I love podcasts. I'm learning so much listening to other people, but we've got to be willing to have the dialogue, and we've got to establish safe places for people to have that dialogue. Like, I've had people of all different political stripes on this, but I'm not going to attack them. People feel comfortable coming in and having a conversation. I might not agree with everything my guests believe, but that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, you said it yourself too. I think the word comfortable there was really, really essential. You know how hard it is to make that change, right? To give up or to rely less on the systems that you're so familiar with, and put yourself in a spot where you have to challenge your own perspectives. I mean, that is hard, right? That is one of the hardest things to do, especially in politics, where right now it's so divisive and you're judged based solely on what you believe. So I think
it's funny, even my experience in office. So there was a guy, now I was 38 when I got elected, but there was another young man that was in his 30s that was running after me. Well, I didn't know him, but I knew a relative of his who was an elected official who had oftentimes didn't act quite civil. Let's just say that. So I endorsed this young man's opponent. And I remember seeing an interview with him, and he's like, the mayor's talking about getting more young people involved, and I offer myself, and he endorses my opponent. But I assumed, I'm like, well, he's this guy's cousin, so he's going to act just like this guy. We've become great friends and everything. But I had a radio show at that point, and I brought him on, and I said, I want to apologize to you because I was wrong about you. I should not have endorsed in that race anyways, but we became fast friends. But to be able to admit you're wrong when you're wrong. That's, I think humility can add a lot to the debate around, politics in general.
Yeah. But again, humility is so hard. And we see that across everywhere. I mean, if you go back to the point we made a couple of minutes ago about being the change you want to see, about living the words that you preach, it's hard to kind of approach with that if our news and our media and every single thing that we consume is so divisive, and it so doesn't walk what it preaches. So I think that there are some institutional hurdles that we have that kind of prevent us from getting to that point. But I am really interested in what that conversation was like between you and that younger gentleman that you interviewed. I mean, even after kind of having that negative endorsement or endorsing his opponent, what was that conversation like?
It's funny because we just started working together as soon as he took office, and we sort of clicked and had a connection. But I almost think that me having done the negative endorsement or the endorsement of another candidate, actually, for me to apologize to him on air to a live audience, I think that actually helped strengthen our relationship in the long run. I mean, he could have just said when he took office, you endorse the other guy, I'm not going to work with you on anything. So it took both of us coming more to the middle. And he was in office for 8 years. We had a strong working relationship for every one of those 8 years, and we still do today.
Interesting. I mean, that's so absent from modern politics. But I am a speech nerd. I love listening to political speeches or social speeches in my free time. And that actually reminds me of the eulogy that Obama gave to McCain in 2017, I believe. I mean, despite being bitter rivals and going head to head on the largest stage in the world, they still worked together. They had regular meetings. They met in the White House, and they were able to challenge each other's opinions in a very constructive way. And that right now is kind of foreign, right? If you were to tell that to the average American, they'd be like, huh, what are you talking about? I mean, we have the idea of draining the swamp, right?
Yeah.
Of completely clearing every elected official, every department head, and replacing them with your own people. I mean, Trump recently fired the Joint Chief of Staff. And that's a position that historically is maintained between presidencies. And so if that's the degree that we are kind of diverging or losing our correct course, then imagine where American society is headed. If we can't even maintain the fundamental connections that we had, and or rather kind of going down this anti-democratic path.
It's unfortunate, but it's playing to people's base emotions of fear and saying, well, those guys are your enemy and our enemy, and so we're just going to destroy them. But it's like I was talking to a friend of mine that's an executive with Chick-fil-A over the weekend. He said, all week long, all I do now is have calls about tariffs. And he said, I don't think most people realize, how interconnected the global economy is. So it makes for a nice soundbite to say, we're going to show those guys, we're going to show that country. But if you speak to people that are actually a part of multinational corporations, it is causing them headaches like nothing before, from what I'm told.
Yeah. I mean, to offer a different perspective, I'm studying international relations, and I'm taking a class on international political economy and international strategy, and reciprocity, and the idea of repeated interaction are really essential to every international system we have. But what happens when you treat each other as hostile agents or enemies in this space really kind of it's really detrimental to the future of your relationship, right? It completely closes the door for future collaboration. And so to see stuff like we saw on Friday with that conversation between Zelensky and Trump is really disheartening, both at the international level, but also at the local level, right? What does that set a precedent for conversations across the dialogue in American politics? If that's the norm, if that's what's normal and modeled by our chief executive, then how are we expected to come to a basic consensus on the most simple political issues in our day-to-day and community lives? It's really disheartening.
It's almost like it's spectacle more so than it is government. And I think about, the Roman Empire and just the Colosseum and people being eaten by lions. But it's like there's a certain percentage that it is, you crane your neck when you see a car wreck. So there are some people that I think probably think, well, this is great. This disruption is great. But to me, it goes back to we can't be it if we can't see it. And I would tell people when I was in office, I would tell my, my colleagues, I'm like, look, when the cameras are on in this room, there are kids that watch how we're behaving. And so I'm going to behave in a way that children would say, okay, that's the way I want to be. But that's I was telling Lindsay last time, my dad taught me to be a professional no matter what I did. And he taught me it was good to be a gentleman and to try to be a role model for the next generation. But I do think, if we think we're operating within a vacuum, which I think some political leaders think, there is damage being done here.
Yeah. You can't only act the way that you do when the cameras are rolling.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm most fascinated about is what happens, or what does politics look like if the cameras were always off, or if the cameras were always on, right? How would that change the way that we interact with each other in a political manner? Or what happens behind closed doors where the cameras aren't on? So I'm curious to kind of read more about that and to see that for real. But I do think it's so important to have systems that keep these politicians in check, even when the cameras are rolling, or even when the cameras aren't rolling. And so that's part of what the Young Forwardists are focusing on for 2025, because it really seems like our system of checks and balances has flown out the window, right? That now politicians can behave however they feel, in whatever manner, in whatever spectacle. And so if somebody's not going to step up, then, there's a void to be filled. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and that's the thing to me is that leadership, a good part of leadership is about consistency, right? So if you're the same when the cameras are on or off, and that's what I always tried to be, is just to be who I am, not to try to act in a way that people perceive politicians to act in that way, to be, I fought against this, I fought against that. And I when I see politicians saying that, okay, I'm like, well, you fought against this and you fought against that, but what did you accomplish? Because I want elected officials that can show me these are all the things that I accomplished. And I would prefer for that to be in bipartisan manner, because to solve the really big picture issues facing our nation, it has to come. I believe it needs to be done in bipartisan fashion.
Yeah, truly. I mean, it's really sad right now that bad behavior is a motivator, right? That bad behavior is what gets you elected, even, right? Being a showman, making a massive fuss in government, or making a massive fuss about government, rather than committing to fixing the issues or to get over your own personal biases and approach an issue solution oriented or compromise oriented. It's, those things have gone out the window. And you mentioned the media earlier. I mean, I think the media, contemporary media, is really the big, I guess, violator of that issue, right? If the primary incentive is to make money, is to attract eyes, then what does that do to American democracy?
Well, and that's a concern of mine for the generations coming up, because it seems like to a large degree, it's almost amplified within the world. You have to have money, fame, and power to be relevant. And it's like, no, that's not, to me, that's not the case, but it is. So, well, these guys have money, fame, and power, and they're on TV all the time. They get whatever they want. I'm like, life should not be about that. It should be, we have leaders modeling what the behavior we want to see in the next generation. Or if we just keep putting down their throat, it's all about the number of TikTok followers you have, or all about your bank account. None of those things are your true identity.
Yeah. Hey, wealth, fame, power. I think that I've seen that on a more personal level in my school, and I'm sure that every other school in the U.S. is pretty similar. But it seems like a lot of people here and in college in general are really concerned about being a prolific part of the status quo, right?
Yeah.
Being better than others, being more wealthy. And it seems like there's been a distinct lack of focus on being happy or being assured about your position, your relationship to the rest of the world. And so I think that, that statement to an extent represents a wider trend in U.S. politics, but also U.S. social culture, right? That we're more concerned about a material realism as opposed to the reality of our relationships and the way that we approach each other and interact with each other. And so it's kind of sad to see that is truly permeated every part of our society, if it's, even more integral than ever to social life at university.
And I've had discussions with Tom Fishman, the CEO of Builders, about, to me, and this is what I hope to do with this podcast, it is it's having those conversations. I'm like, and you can be edgy and irreverent without being offensive. And I think that's a good thing. But I think the more that people find podcasts like this, the better, because they're out there. There is counter programming to the mainstream media if you go look for it. But I was talking to a girl, I was getting immunotherapy today. I have once monthly precautionary immunotherapy. And she said, I've just started listening to your podcast. She's like, I never listened to a podcast before. She's like, I love it. But I'm like, there's something more nourishing about it. Doesn't play on fear or anything. It's just, we can all help educate each other about, issues going on in the world rather than it being the 30-second soundbite.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder what her perspective is versus the perspective that we have here, talking to each other and having a space to not only discuss our perspectives, but to challenge each other's. I think that one of the most important things that we can have in American society, and even just on a more personal and intercultural level, are safe spaces to maintain a dialogue, right? To challenge other people's perspective, but also to challenge your own. And so I think that we've seen a gradual regression of that in American social culture. And part of that, of course, is propagated by the media, as we've been talking about. But one thing that we've been really committed to as the Young Forwardists is actually replacing that void, right? Providing safe spaces for youth in spaces like high schools and colleges, in communities with a very strong youth presence. Because when that's absent, then that's when we forget to challenge each other's views. That's when we become steadfast and okay in accepting ours as the only perspective.
Well, it's interesting. So in talking to the group last week, the YPO group, I was referencing the Forward Party. Basically, nobody had heard of them. Young Forwardists, basically nobody had heard of them. The Future Caucus, which has been active for 10 years in Congress. There's chapters throughout America now. There's one in Georgia, but where it's Democrats and Republicans, young legislators, I mean, Gen Z, millennials before them, where the Future Caucus teaches them, critical problem solving skills. And that age group is getting more bipartisan legislation passed in Washington and in state houses every place. I asked the crew last week, have you ever heard of them? No. And I'm like, well, Bridge USA is on 60 college campuses. There's Bridge Europe and Bridge Africa now. So there are all these groups doing this great work, but they don't fit with the mainstream media narrative that we're horribly broken and we are beyond the point of repair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I'm very familiar with the Future Caucus, with Bridge USA, Braver Angels, even.
Yeah,
those are groups that we're pretty regularly in contact with, or that we've been pretty aware of in the Forward Party and in these third party environments, third party spaces, and that's because we have an incentive to care about them. And I think what's really absent from modern media is that because it's propagated by a system that is so money and attention driven, we really can't even give them the space in any of these publications. And so I think it takes a moral commitment, which is certainly lacking in our current political atmosphere, right? It takes a moral commitment to give up what might be a very valuable two-party system to even invite others to the conversation, right? Giving them the electoral victory or giving them the electoral space is one thing, but just letting them into the conversation is the very first step. And that itself is such a hard thing to morally get around.
Well, it's interesting. I spend a lot of time every day praying every morning. I pray for you by name, as a matter of fact, and the Young Forwardists. But, I'm like, Lord, thank you for giving us ears to hear, to listen and to hear, and help us to listen for, set aside distractions and listen for and hear your voice, but also each other's voices, because it's so much talking over each other. But if we will really, take the time to listen openly to other people, I tell people a mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. But here again, I'm still learning. I'm 57 years old, and I love being around the Young Forwardists because I believe in cross-generational learning. But just really, good gosh, we've got to be able to listen to each other.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a good point, though. We love having you, and I really appreciate all the support that you have for us. And for me, it means truly a lot. But I think that we can't be under the perspective that because we're youth, we are isolated, right? That our solutions are our solutions and that we can get them passed on our own. It really isn't like that whatsoever. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I got involved in the Young Forwardists and the Forward Party and really flourished with agency. And I think that truly is a product of the cooperation between my generation and some of the older generations, right? If I hadn't had that opportunity, or if I hadn't had that relationship with these other generations, then we really wouldn't have the Young Forwardists, or we wouldn't have this space for safe and good interaction. And so I think that it is extremely important to make sure that we are considering these cross-generational relationships and really prioritizing them over anything else. I mean, I can't tell you how much I've learned from the older generations, because really everything you do learn is.
Well, and it was such a pleasure to be able to speak to that group last week and give you guys a shout out. And I'm like, why don't we reward and lift up good behavior versus bad behavior? Why don't you meet my friend Gabe, who's an 18-year-old leader that believes he can change the world, and because he believes he can, he is, and he will. But I'm like, but one of the questions I got was, but how do we what's the best place to talk to the younger generation? I said, well, one thing, it is put away your phones when you have a discussion so that neither side is distracted. But I was doing some research recently, and I think it was a Pew poll that polled teenagers and said, what's the main thing you'd like to see your parents do? Get off their cell phones and pay more attention to us. So if, get the cell phones, but I'm like, don't speak to younger people just like they're little children. I mean, it's like I have in-depth discussion with my 12-year-old nephew. Don't treat them like they have to sit at the children's table. Invite them to be a part of the table. It's when you and I applied to be to do the forum for South by Southwest, which we didn't get in this year, but we will.
Next year.
I told you were a full partner. It was me and you and Scott Mackey out of Texas. But I'm like, we're all equal and we're all learning from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I even wrote this down. I wrote, treat them like you're on the same level. And you said that yourself. So it's great to hear that the older generations are aware of that and that that's something that you guys are considering, because I think that growing up, it is tough to be at the kids' table.
Yeah.
And especially in politics, right? I mean, you see an interesting interaction when Doge is hiring young people. They feel very, very empowered. And whether that's the right thing in that space is different. But really, when it comes to treating people on the same level ideologically, it makes so much of a difference, right? I mean, youth historically have been some of the most impactful demographics when it comes to making change, right? Historically, I mean, most of the revolutions that brought the United States even have been a product of youth engagement. I mean, I think I remember correctly that the founding fathers were incredibly young. And I think the white wigs do deceive you often, but they were in their 20s, 30s. Yep. And so when we look at it now, I mean, it seems like there has been a categorical shift, right? If the average age is so far above the minimum age to get elected to places like Congress, right? The average age of our House of Representatives and the Senate is absurdly high. It really can feel othering to be a youth and to be active in that field, knowing that you aren't treated on the same level. But the moment that you are, it really opens our community and our democracy up to so much more fluidity in conversation and problem solving.
Well, and it's funny to me, and I think I said this, I made mention the last time you were on the show. I was speaking to an older couple at a watering hole that I like to frequent, possibly more than I should. But anyways, they were talking about Generation Z. Mm-hmm. They're lazy, they're this, they're that, and all that. I'm like, well, but you guys don't have kids. What are you basing that on? Well, our friends' grandkids, they won't listen to us or anything. I'm like, so that's your sample size? Is like your friend's 5 grandkids, and you're going to base your viewpoint on a whole generation based on that interaction. I'm like, come meet my friend Gabe, who I like to get on the show and have like an hour-long conversation with. I'm like, don't assume you know what somebody's thinking if you haven't asked them what they were thinking first.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great motto. I think we see that all the time in American culture, and I'm so ready to have those conversations, right? To engage with people who feel that way, and really to challenge their perspective. And I think, right, to go back to the very start of our conversation, when that real change happens, is when people like myself or other youth are able to get up and make sure that the world knows that our voices can be heard. Because that's the moment that we're stopped, being treated like a kid, but rather as an active participant in American democracy or in the American social world.
Well, I have 12 great nieces and nephews now. My oldest great niece just turned 16, but I've got a nephew that's 15. But when our last interview came out, they were some of the first people I sent it to. I'm like, you guys are teenagers, but look at what Gabe and his friends are doing. I'm like, it's pretty incredible, but I'm hoping that it's not going to be too long before they go to college, but they will get involved with Young Forwardists because they heard about them when they were 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, we hope so. And we're trying to open chapters. Well, we've opened a number of chapters in high schools to open kids of that age to the same opportunities that these college students are getting, right? That other people who are a bit older and can often get more involved in politics, we're trying to kind of give them equal opportunities there.
Well, and I feel, and Tom Fishman and I from Builders had this conversation, I'm now more hopeful than ever. Maybe that's because I'm not watching the media these days or on social media, but it is because I'm having conversations with guys like you and with Lindsay and with Tom and with all these people that are actually out there. They're not just speaking about change. They're putting their money and their time where their mouth is, which is what you're doing. I mean, you're a freshman at Penn, but you're still finding the time to do what you're doing with the Young Forwards, which I'm like, that is way cooler than money, fame, and power to me.
Yeah, I mean, everything comes at an expense to something else. So
Yeah.
that happened with my Chinese test this morning.
With your what?
My Chinese test this morning.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so a little too much politics, but I definitely think that that's really important, right? Having those conversations. And I think that Lindsay is one of the best people you could interview to have those conversations that really change your perspective. I think one of the most important things is talking to somebody who you know believes in what they're saying, right? Like, it's so easy to tell these days. And I think you do a really great job at this. We're so good at telling who is telling the truth and who is genuine versus who truly is ingenuine or who is saying something to say something. And I think that when you have those conversations with people who truly are genuine, you're able to come to a position where you realize, maybe the world isn't so bad after all, right? Maybe our democracy isn't as doomed as it might seem if you look on CNN or Fox or really any media these days.
Well, it's funny. I just went on the vestry of my church, so basically the board of the church. Mm-hmm. But we've got a 38-year-old new rector, new priest, and so he's changing things up. I'm like, church politics can get, they're every bit as bad as any place else. But I'm like, I like having a younger rector. And I told him when he came in, I'm like, you're the same age I was when I first got elected mayor. But I'm like, I feel like I'm able to come alongside of him. But so a girl that goes to our church, I spoke to at my treatment this morning. So she was like, oh my gosh, I went to church last night. And I'm like, I couldn't find a parking place. And I was like, what was going on? She goes, we just started doing mahjong at church. And so it's all these, 20-something-year-old people and older people too. I don't play mahjong, but she was like, it was just incredible. But that's not something we probably would have done 5 years ago. But I think that's cool, bringing people in the doors of the church through doing something a little different. Everybody playing mahjong. I hope nobody was gambling, but.
Yeah, right. It's funny you mentioned that because my high school has been going through a mahjong phase. And so I've heard that people on like Saturday night, Friday night, will get together and just play for hours and hours. And there seems to be a real commitment to teaching people who are unfamiliar with the game and with the culture of the game, all those important details. And I think like what happens if we use that lesson for American politics, right? We adopt something that's new. We adopt something that can often be seen as foreign and confusing, but really commit to teaching each other and to understanding something, not only so that we have, another game to play, but rather so we have another way of enjoying our interactions with each other. I mean, there really are some important lessons there.
No, and I mean, we were created to live in community. I honestly believe that. And to me, it's like somebody asked me one time, if Augusta was a food, what would it be? I said, well, it would be a gumbo because everybody knows that gumbo would not taste as good if it didn't have all the different ingredients in it. And I'm like, you're never going to learn as a person, grow as a person, if you're only around people that look like you, act like you, and think like you, and reinforce your views. So the more conversations we can have like this, the better. And so I'm talking with some people about maybe partnering on this podcast to get it a little more, bandwidth. I hope that's going to happen because I think what we're doing is what Americans want to see. They want to know that there is a better way. They want to know that there's hope for the future with sharp young people like yourself and that aren't jaded and believe that, well, it's always got to be this way. Politics is always going to be negative and cutthroat. And I remember you told me the first time I interviewed you, this type of toxic political polarization is all my generation has ever known, and I believe we deserve better. And I said, that's why I want to work with you guys however I can, because I believe you deserve better too.
Yeah, I mean, that's an impactful message. And I mean, my hometown is extremely rural. The most notable thing that, we were actually the birthplace of James Buchanan, which, that's the most exciting thing that's probably happened to our community in a couple hundred years. I mean, that aside, though, we are truly homogenous and there is far less diversity of opinion. But that doesn't stop people from having these intercultural discussions or from gathering for a protest, or for challenging the status quo, even in that tight-knit, often very conservative community. And so I think there's a lot of beauty to that, right? To putting one's perspectives or one's biases aside, and rather kind of engaging in a more wholesome and constructive manner. But it's a change.
Yeah, and I just but you're not going to see the change you got to be the change too. But if you're sitting in front of your TV set or your computer screen all the time, you're not going to see it. If you're out there at the farmer's market or on campus or wherever, you can see that there people are hungry for change. And I saw that in the audience I spoke to last week, but people are hungry for hope too. And you guys provide me a tremendous amount of hope for the future.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, though, it takes a lot of drive, right? I've been doing this for a year with the Young Forwardists, 3 years for the Forward Party. And there are so many times that it feels endless and futile, right? That we're pushing against a system that's never going to let us in. And that often is how it is, right? We're not wanted in this political system, right? There isn't any room for a third party or for other parties in general. So somebody has to be the one that goes in, that breaks it up, and that makes it far more inclusive, because clearly, nobody is at the moment. But it's that drive and that willing to persevere, even when it seems completely futile, that really makes the difference.
Well, it does. And as we get down towards the end, I want to say thank you for being an awesome guest. But I've got to ask you one thing, a couple questions to close out. Where can people find you and the Young Forwardists?
The easiest way is on any of our social media. We are at Young Forwardists on Instagram. We love when you sign up on our website. So Forward Party, you go to join us, go to committees, and then hit Young Forwardists all the way at the bottom. It's alphabetical. It's annoying. But by joining, you become more aware of our network and the events we have. So for instance, we're planning a couple really big events. A couple weeks ago, we hosted an 850-person event at Brown University. And so there are so many more events like that are coming. And by being a part of that social network, you're able to kind of stay in touch and get involved.
My brother, John, is actually a Brown graduate. Wow. Shout out, John, if you're listening. Okay, my last question. On a regular basis, on a daily basis, what brings a smile to your face and brings joy to your heart?
That's a really good question. I think just seeing people engaged in things they love, right? It seems like passion, especially in people's work, is so rare nowadays. And so to see that even on one person's face, walking down Locust Walk, or on one of these video calls where I meet some other really inspired youth who are getting involved with the Young Forwardists, that truly does bring a smile to my face.
Well, man, I will tell you, Gabe, you are welcome back anytime you'd like to come, or any of your cohorts of the Young Forwardists who would like a platform to speak to a lot of people. There's an open invitation for you.
Thank you, Deke. I really appreciate it.
Okay, that's all the time that we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out. Hey, guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's a pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.